Yes, people. So I've asked ChatGPT to give me 15 questions on mind, body, and soul through self-improvement, spiritual, and psychological lens. So these questions are quite hard. I just had a quick scan through them there. So it's going to be an interesting episode, and just stay tuned because there's a wide variety of topics being covered. So question number 1, how do you personally define the difference between the mind and the soul, and where do you see them overlapping? Well, I think I'm going to reframe this question and get rid of the word soul because I think it has connotations of religious backgrounds, and I think that instantly gets people's back up. So I'm going to change the word soul to self. And by self, I mean Jungian psychology in terms of like self being the grand totality of our personality, something that extends beyond time, that extends beyond our ego formation and the formation of our persona, but resides as a totality of our being in consciousness. And we can use soul, but I think it's just helpful to use self instead of that term. And so where I'll see the difference between the mind and the soul or self is the mind is ego. The mind is the contents that make up the formulation of our psyche, in terms of I have these thoughts and these emotions and they arise up into consciousness, and what I identify as mind is the things that arise up into awareness. That's kind of how I would see mind. And you could take this from different doctrines. The Buddhists would see the mind as the totality of identity, and then they would say that awareness or consciousness or oneness with God is the detachment away from mind and you sitting with observation. And so from a spiritual lens, from a religious lens, the difference between mind and soul would be observation versus attachment to identity. And that's how you could see it. In my opinion, I would see the mind as the ego persona, the contents of what we can observe, and also like the shadow, the parts of us we don't observe and we can integrate, and the soul being the ground for that to breed out of, or the self, that being the material for the identity to form out of. And so if we see it as kind of like the soil, and our identity and our self-consciousness being the fruit or the tree that comes out of the soil, I think the soil is the soul, the soil is the self, and it's something that is timeless. It's something that doesn't go away. It's embedded into the nature of consciousness and the nature of who we are. And I think the manifestation of that soul into the material world is mind. The manifestation of that self into the material world is what is mind, and that's what we attach to as mind. It says, and where do you see them overlapping? Where I see mind and soul, or mind and self overlapping, is how I think the job of the mind is relate to the self, relate to the soul. And where they overlap is we go through this developmental stage of consciousness, which is we are born as soul. We are born as this awareness. We don't have an idea of identity. We don't have an idea of separateness. And there's no duality there. There is no like, I look at objects and objects over there and I'm here. But as you go through the developmental process of forming an identity, you start realizing that you are here and objects are out there. Things are out there. People are out there. They're separate from you. You are not one. You look at the consciousness of a baby. He thinks he controls everything. He cries or she cries and things come to her, things come to him. So you start off with this openness, this expansiveness. You are everything. Nothing is separate. But as you formulate an identity, as you formulate an idea of who you are, you then understand that, right, I am separate. And this is where mind comes into place. This is where ego formation comes into the place. And this is where the contents of the mind build up. And it creates this separateness. It creates a separateness from you and reality, which is needed to observe it as something else. It's to observe reality as something that's not you. And there you form an identity. You learn how to work in social situations, how to fit into the world, and these things that develop and they form a separate sense of self. And this is where I think the mind comes in. Where I see them overlapping is that the mind is developed from the soil, it's developed from the material of the soul. The soul, in a sense, is like a seed. There's a guy called James Hillman who's a Jungian analysis, and he has the idea that embedded into the genetic psychic print of humans is like is kind of a seed for them to grow. And it's like as the oak what's it called? As the acorn can develop into an oak tree, so can the soul develop into what is meant to in the world. We all have this seed of potential. And so I think that's where the soul holds out. The soul holds the potential of our mind. And I think the mind's goal is to breed out of that and then learn to relate back into it. And from awareness, from a point of separateness, we then start to come back inward. So if you think of spiral dynamics of consciousness developing upwards, forming an identity, learning how to relate to our impulses, our urges, creating a shadow, creating a persona, whatever it is, and then we get to a point of in late adolescence to adulthood where we understand who we are and we have a firm grasp on our identity, then the next stage is then to look backwards on ourselves and integrate the aspects of the soul and become soulful beings. There's a good book called Embodied Spirituality in a Sacred World. That's what we want to do. We want to embody our spirituality, embody our soul in the world, and bring that soulfulness into the world and into what we're meant to be. And that's where I see them overlapping, the mind and the soul being the soil and the mind being the thing that manifests from that. And then the mind kind of gets us lost in a sense. We forget our connectedness to everything. We forget our connectedness to our soul. And the job for that then, once we have a developed mind, once we refine the mind, once we become aware and detach from mind but integrate, then the job is then to look backwards on the contents of the soul, the contents of the unconscious, and then to integrate them into a whole awareness. And so our mind becomes soul. We become the totality of our individuation. We go on the individuation process and become who we're meant to be. So I hope that makes sense. That was a really difficult question. And I don't think this next one's any easier. So the second question is, from a psychological perspective, how much of our suffering is created by the mind? And from a spiritual view, how much of it is meant to teach us something? From a psychological perspective, how much of our suffering is created by the mind? I think if you go to the Buddhist doctrine, and the essential axiom there is life is suffering. There's suffering in everything that you do, and physical pain essentially is the basic reality. You can never escape away from physical pain. You could argue that emotional suffering and emotional turmoil and the trauma that we go through is all narrative. It's something that the mind creates, but that actual physical sensation of pain, you can't get away from that, and that is kind of embedded into what it is to be a human, and that creates suffering. And so essentially at the core of it, life is suffering because we have to deal with physical pain. And so how much of our suffering is created by the mind? A lot of it. And this is where you get to unnecessary suffering. This is attachment to the mind. I'm coming from a Buddhist doctrine here. And it says, and the Buddhists say, like, all of it is just attachment to the mind. You're causing yourself suffering from samsaras, which are attachment to thought, attachment to desire, because you desire things because you can't accept how things are, because you can't live in the present. You then create seeds of doubt within your mind, and then that takes you away from accepting what is, and that causes suffering, and you get stuck in the hedonic treadmill of always wanting something that isn't right here. And so the Buddhist doctrine would say all suffering comes from the mind. All unnecessary suffering comes from the mind. Real suffering is pain embedded into the nature of reality. That is kind of where we sit. Physical pain is, and then again, some Buddhist monks and some Buddhist practices can take you away from physical pain. You do Vipassana, and you can learn just to observe the sensations of physical pain and not even attach to them as pain. But a lot of suffering comes from the mind. And there's always a very good quote from Seneca. And it's, we suffer more in imagination than we do in reality. And I think the mind creates that, the imagination of, and not the imagination in a way, but the thinking and the daydreaming of, I wish I was doing this, why am I not here, this comparison to others. That's all coming from the mind. It comes from social comparison. It comes from how we've grown up, how we formulated our identity, and how we see ourselves in the world. These are all narratives. These are all scripts. These are all stories that we tell ourselves. And all of that suffering is it comes from attaching to them stories, attaching to them narratives. And if you do like basic cognitive behavioral therapy work, the idea is to disprove and disvalidate ways of seeing yourself. And so if you see yourself in a way where you're causing yourself suffering, like put that to the test, and how much of that is true, how much of that actually holds up to truth. Is it true that you're a failure? Is it true that you are indeed unlovable? And like these things can be held up and they can be examined and tested against. And I don't recommend using just purely cognitive behavioral therapy, because I think it neglects parts of your feeling mechanism that feel like that, and it represses parts of you that feel like that. But it's a good practice to examine these thoughts and realize how much suffering is coming from just like the thought mechanism, or how much suffering is coming from just the way that you're perceiving yourself, and that's all coming from mind. And how much of this is meant to teach us something. That again, there's another Buddhist quote: "It's your soul picks the suffering that it can handle." And there's a spiritual idea that like we're here to learn a lesson. We're here to, as Ram Dass would put, take the curriculum. I always remember listening to a podcast by Ram Dass, and he was off meditating in the Himalayas and like becoming and living with his guru. And he came back to the US and just really thought, like, I don't belong here. Like, what am I doing? Like, this is completely not spiritually aligned with who I am. And someone said to him, like, Ram Dass, why don't you take the curriculum? Why don't you just live your life and use that as your meditation? Why don't you use your life to teach you about what you're attached to who you think you are, and how that is a lie, how that is not the truth, how all of this can teach you something about the true nature of your psyche and your potential. And so take the curriculum, use life to teach you something. Every time I've been through suffering, whether it be social anxiety or things I've been through in the past year or so that have been very difficult, it's like I sit there and I feel what it feels like to have gone through that. And it's hard, and you repress parts and you don't, but you go through it and it's like, wow, that taught me something. It refined something within me, and it refined your awareness and the circumstances of life and the suffering of life and the suffering of mind show you parts of yourself that you're not aware of. It integrates shadow work. It helps you become aware of the totality of your being, of your identity, and move towards individuation. And suffering is one of our biggest teachers. And whether that's unnecessary suffering or real true suffering, it's used for something. It's a refinement tool. And I think through that we really learn to become more embodied. We learn to become more whole, and we learn to become stronger people. And it's that Nietzsche quote is a very famous one. It's whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And in a way, all the suffering that we go through and all the things we learn, they teach us something in a way. And that can be very hard for people with very traumatic upbringings and who have been in very traumatic situations. And sometimes it can be like, what is this meant to teach me? This is just completely undeserved. And I'm reading Answer to Job. I've got the book here by Carl Jung at the minute. And the book of Job is one of the oldest books in the Bible. And it's about a guy who is of godly nature. He's like completely righteous. He does no wrong. And God has a bet with Satan to test his faith, to test Job's faith in God. And so God kills his parents, kills his wife, his sons, kills all of his livestock, takes all of his money away from him, and Job is left with nothing. And Job still stands strong with his faith to God. God then makes him physically ill, and Job still stands true to his faith of God. And there's a bunch of friends that are with Job, and all the friends are speaking to Job, going, "You must have done something wrong. You must have done something in a past life. This must be your karma." And they're giving him all these arguments. And Job's like, "No, I'm a righteous man. I know I'm going to appeal to God." And he asks God to come to like the courtship in a way. And he stands his ground and goes, "God, I am a righteous man. This is what I've done." And God answers to him in a way that shows the dualistic side of God. It shows the dark side of God. And he kind of puts Job down, and he says, "How dare you question me? How dare you not show faith in me? Even though Job is completely in the right, he hasn't done wrong. And it shows how God can do bad and God has a dark side. And Jung's answer to this, Jung's comprehension of the book of Job, which I've never heard from anyone else, is that God has a dark side and God isn't conscious of his own totality. God is not just good, he's not just righteous, he's not just a point of he's not just a perfect point that we can head towards. God is everything. God is evil in the world. God is, if he's the creator, he created the devil, he created all of these different aspects. And so God is not aware that he's doing these things. Humans, and Job was here to make God aware of his shadow side. And God has a shadow side and God has a dark side. And that was Jung's answer. So to go back to this question of how much of it is meant to teach us something, maybe it's not. Maybe we're here to make God aware of the suffering that's in the world. And maybe there isn't an answer. Maybe there isn't a teaching within the suffering. But maybe by holding up our little light of consciousness, we can reflect a bit of the darkness of the grand totality of God, and we can bring awareness to God. And it's an interesting thought, right? Because, and I'm going completely off tangent here, but it's an interesting thought because the whole Bible God, the Yahweh, is a very personal with humans. Like if you look at all the Greek gods and all the other gods, they're like way beyond the human drama. But Yahweh takes, and I say Yahweh in terms of like the Christian God takes a very, or the Judeo-Christian God takes a very keen interest in humans and wants a relationship with humans. And why is that? And it's because if you look at the Adam and Eve story, when humans become self-consciousness, they take a bite from the apple of the tree of knowledge. It's like humans have this self-awareness that maybe even God doesn't have, and maybe we're bringing awareness with our only small little light of awareness to God, and that is humans' goal. And so the suffering and the unnecessary suffering that happens in the world and the hardships that happen to people that they don't deserve, maybe we're there to experience it and to accept it because we can't change it. God is all being, is almighty, but maybe we can refine consciousness through that and reflect it back to the creator, reflect it back to the being, and maybe we can learn as a collective consciousness through that. Number 3 is, do you believe the body stores emotional or energetic memories? How does trauma show up physically? Yeah, so if you read like somatic therapy or bioenergetics, it is the idea that trauma gets imprinted into the nervous system and gets imprinted into the body. And I've had experiences of this through psychoactive substances and deep meditation. I can always think back to my 6th day of my meditation retreat when I sat my 10-day silent one. And I remember having a pain in my knee so sharp that it felt like someone was ripping the socket out. And I kind of like went into that pain and truly felt the sensations of the pain. And I started having memories come up, and memories from like school and childhood. And then I was starting feeling all these different sensations around my body, and all these memories started popping up. And it showed me and revealed to me how the memories sit within the body and they get imprinted into the nervous system. And if you think about it, especially from like a young age, when we acquire a lot of our trauma, because our prefrontal cortex, the intellectual knowledge, isn't developed strong enough to be able to make sense of that trauma. It's very emotional, it's very feeling, it's very sensational based. So when things happen when we're younger, we don't have a story to wrap around them. We don't have a refined narrative that can help us comprehend that. So it gets imprinted into more the limbic system, the more precognitive parts of the brain, and they get imprinted as memories and as feelings, and they get stuck there and they get encoded into our central nervous system. And because they're running throughout of our body, and they might be encoded into our muscles, into aches in our joints, into like stomach pain, into like gut issues, into spinal issues, whatever it may be, they get encoded there before cognitive thought. And so they get stuck and left there, and it becomes like blockages of energy within the body. And I think the goal here is to like let that flow of energy move out and release the blockages and feel the sensations and really tap into the emotions that are sitting there and get behind the narrative, get away from the story that's protecting that energy, because that energy there is like a defense mechanism. It's to protect yourself. It's like it couldn't handle the rawness of that experience, so you've had blockages there to stop you from feeling it, and that trauma, that traumatic experience, or the collation of traumatic experiences gets trapped in the body, and then you develop mind defenses over that. And if you can get past the mind defenses and touch into the emotion, touch into the raw sensations of the body, then you can release the blockages and work through them. And I always find it very interesting reading Waking the Tiger by Peter Levine, when he talks about, like, you see a gazelle out in the wild and it can be sat there just grazing, mowing on some grass. Then all of a sudden it hears like a rattling in the bush, and it stops, it freezes, and it's there. And all of the blood kind of rises up and centralizes towards the muscles and getting ready to go. And then it hears the lion go after it, and the lion starts sprinting after it, and the gazelle runs, and it runs, and it runs. And the gazelle just about escapes. And when the gazelle knows it's safe, what you'll see the gazelle do is shake its body. It will physically shake and shake off all that energy, shake off all that trauma. It will shake off all the energy that is required. And once it's shaken off, once it's felt through, it will then start mowing the grass like nothing's happened again. And there'll be a slight memory of it, but it won't get encoded within the body. The mind will take notice of patterns. There'll be pattern recognition, but it won't be a traumatic experience that gets locked in the body. What happens with humans quite often is, on the other end, because we have this prefrontal cortex, because we have this rational mind, these experiences can happen, and we can get this massive rush from trauma of all these sensations, and instead of letting them go, we lock them behind a narrative, we lock them behind a story, we lock them behind something that tries to make sense of it rationally, and then that locks it away in the body, and it stops us from feeling it. It stops the energy from being able to shake it out. So in a way, what we need to do is like shake out the memory, shake out the emotional energy of the trauma, of the stuff we've been through. And through that, we will find that we are lighter and we'll have less pains. We might have less gut issues. A lot of trauma and a lot of stress and anxiety sits within the gut. It's a lot of reason why people have gut issues. And so trauma shows up physically in that way. It shows up. It can show up in eczema, and you get psychosomatic illnesses. So yeah, we need to be there needs to be a big reminder on, like, the mind and the body are kind of one of the same thing. They sit within each other, and they're both like dualistic in the sense that they work together, but they're kind of the same thing as well. And so yeah, it's an interesting question. Number 4, what role does self-awareness play in healing, and can too much self-analysis actually block growth? Oh, good question. Self-awareness, in a way, is integration. It's integration of everything, of who you are and what you do and how you operate in the world. And it plays an essential role in healing, because all healing starts with awareness. If you're not aware of something, if you're not aware of a defense, if you're not aware of a way of being, then it's blocked in the shadow, and what's in the shadow is repressed down in the unconscious, and it's not accessible to consciousness. And the whole point of self-consciousness, of this little ball of awareness that we have, is to reflect our little light into the contents of the unconscious and integrate that and become aware of it and build it into our awareness. So we really want the ego, in the Jungian sense of awareness, to become bigger, to become stronger, to be able to hold more. And so we need to become aware of that. Bit by bit, we need to take on more of the totality of ourselves and bring that into awareness. And so self-awareness is everything in healing, because you need to be aware of things. And I don't know, because I don't think you need to be aware of everything, but I think you need to be acceptant of things that come up. I don't think you also need to be aware of everything that spills out of the unconscious, because if you was to be aware of everything, you'd be aware of the schemas in terms of like how to walk and like how I move this muscle and that muscle. That's all unconscious processes. Everything is everything gets imprinted in habits in the unconscious. And some things we don't need to be aware of, because we don't need to know how to beat our own heart, for example. We don't need to become aware of that. Maybe we do, and maybe this is something that is like enlightenment or the next stage of consciousness, but it doesn't feel like to me that we need to know how to do them things. Like some essence, the soul, the self in a way knows how to do that. But I think what we need to do is allow the psychological stuff to become aware of it. We need to become aware of the psychological stuff, the mind stuff, the contents of the unconscious and the contents of the collective unconscious. And so self-awareness plays a critical role in that. Self-analysis and can too much of it actually block growth? Of course it can. And you've also got to be very careful of what place are you coming from when you're doing self-analysis. What are you actually trying to achieve when you're trying to solve things? You know, when you're journaling or you're digging deep into the unconscious, like, why are you digging deep, and where is that digging coming from? Because if it's coming from trying to fix yourself, that is a neurosis. That is a pattern of the mind that's trying to achieve something. And trying to achieve something often comes from stories and narratives that have been built up from trauma or from the society or the psychodynamic relationship with our parents. And so that trying to solve something becomes an issue in its way. You need to be careful that self-analysis doesn't become trying to pick things, because you'll find things that aren't there and you will block energies that actually truly want to heal. And so a lot of healing it kind of looks like passivity in a way. If you think of like the Taoist philosophy of Wu Wei, effortless action, or if you think of the Tao in terms of things naturally flow, things emerge, this self and the healing nature of that, by getting in touch with the soul, getting in touch with the totality of who you are, that is healing in a way, because the self-actualization principle is to refine us towards more consciousness. We're naturally driving towards more consciousness, and it's defenses that get in the way. It's things that try to stop us. And so too much self-analysis can hurt this, but sometimes you need to dig deep with a neurosis to realize that there's nothing there to find. Alan Watts always had an interesting quote. It's with psychedelics. It's like, once you picked up the phone, once you've got the message, stop picking up the phone. And it's the same with self-analysis. It's like, once you get the message of things emerge up when they should, and you can't force things, and stop trying to go inwards as much and pick your times. There'll be seasons in life where self-analysis is important, but you can't be doing it all the time, because you'll stress yourself out and your life will be a bit of a headache. Question number 5. How do ego and intuition differ? And how can someone learn to tell which one is speaking? I don't know. I can't answer that. I can give it a go, but I feel like it wouldn't be a good enough answer. And I don't actually understand intuition enough to be able to give a good answer for that. So sorry, guys. Number 6. Is self-improvement about coming better, or remembering who you already are beneath conditioning? Oh, good question. I think if we look at humanistic psychology, and the humanistic being like Carl Rogers, Abraham Maslow, even like Jung was a humanistic psychologist in a way. They're all about allowing things to emerge. They're all about allowing things to play in their natural course and to be who you are. And the idea of better is something of the mind. It's something of the ego. It's something of the persona. And is your idea of better actually aligned with who you are? Or is it just the ideas of progress that you've picked up from the culture or from society? And so a lot of like the scarcity that comes from the self-improvement culture, which is I need to get better, I need to improve, that all comes from this place of a lack of abundance, of a lack of accepting your organism for what it is. And it's like, you must be disciplined, you must be on the grind, you must be in this. It's such, it very pockets you into this like niche way of looking at success. And that's become the mainstay of our culture now. That's become the mainstay of improvement, is to always do more, always be more, always attain more. And it's like, what are you chasing more for? Fulfillment doesn't lie in more. Fulfillment lies within who you are. So a lot of spiritual growth and a lot of psychological growth is stripping things back. It is taking layers away, and is actually learning and coming to your core more than it is expanding and acquiring. And so I think self-improvement is more about remembering and coming to terms with who you are than it is becoming better. But I think there's this balance between the two, because I think you have to strive to be better to accept who you are. And I think there needs to be a certain amount of discipline and a certain amount of striving through the ego, through the cultural ideals. And that allows you to fit into the world, and that allows you to be, in a way, successful in the world, because we are part of the world. But also we need to realize that we are not all that, and that getting better needs to strive towards becoming who we are. And it can be paradoxical in a way, but I think that I answered that question there in terms of you must strive and you must do things in the world, but also that can be, in a way, taking you away from who you are. So I think it depends what stage of life you're in and how you're looking at yourself. I think there's different stages and seasons of life where if you're developing an identity, for example, still forming an ego from an early age, I don't think it helps to strip back the conditioning as much, because you're there to develop an understanding of an ego. You're there to develop an ego. You're there to strive to get more, to test and validate your ideas around the world, and to get success and feedback from the world. And I think later on, in terms of what, like when you get older, or if you hit a spiritual emergency and you feel like you're going through a dark night of the soul, that can be a time to strip back ideas. But I think there's times for self-improvement, there's times for getting better, but I think in the realization of your whole life, I think it's about stripping back and becoming who you are. How does spirituality, well, this is question number 7. How does spirituality explain anxiety or depression differently from traditional psychology, and where do they agree? Oh, wow. Good question. Let's think of spirituality in terms of like the New Age movement, which derives a lot from Eastern way of thought, so Buddhism, and a lot of meditation and stuff. And I think meditation has this really weird way of looking at anxiety, and so does Buddhism in a way, where it's like it's just a thought, it's just an emotion, it's just a thing that arises. And I don't necessarily if I agree with that, because I meditated for so many years. I meditated for 5 years, very consistently, sat meditation retreats, up to 30 minutes to an hour a day. And I was very deep in Eastern way of thought. And I started to learn to suppress the anxiety, like when it would arise, when the feelings of social anxiety would emerge, and I'd get like the sweaty palms, my heart rate would start to increase, like the psychological symptoms of it, and my mind would start to go. I learned to bring myself back to the breath and instantly pull myself away from it. And there was an acceptance of it. There was a note in that, right, that's anxiety, but then it would be a back to my breath, back to anchoring, and back to realizing that that's not me. It's just the contents of the mind. And I think a lot of spirituality can make you think that isn't actually you that is feeling anxious. It's just the content of the mind. Whereas I don't see the mind as this one thing. I see the mind being plural, and not plural, like multiple, in terms of we are made of subcomponents of personalities, of complexes. There is different parts of us. And so when anxiety arises, I now see it as, wow, this is part of me that feels anxious. Who is that part? How do I integrate that? Let's question with it. Let's let it be anxious. Let's find out where it comes from. And there's more of not just noting that it's anxiety, there's more of a curiosity and a love and compassion in towards, let's figure out who you are. Let's integrate you. Let's speak to you. Let's dialogue with you. Let's treat you as you're alive and you're a being. And I think from psychological perspective, especially if we look at depth psychology or depth psychology, let's go with that. Psychoanalysis is more like, the mind is made up of these multiples. And if you look at internal family systems, we've got this family system within our mind, and let's not just treat it as it's anxiety being this one thing, that just this straight thing. It's a living being that feels like that, and it can be communicated with, and it's an archetypal emotion in a way, and from that is born contents within our material mind. So it's something to dialogue with and something to be curious about. And I think that's where I agree with the psychological perspective more. I also think there is value in just learning to repress some things, not repress them, but just like being able to push them off and push them away, because not everything that arrives that derives into awareness is useful. And spiritual practices, especially meditation, have been very useful for me in terms of being able to just like note things and get them out of the way. When I'm sat there and I'm about to go and speak to someone, or I need to deliver something in terms of I need to speak to people, or I need to present something, I don't need the feelings of social anxiety there right now. It's good to be able to go, no, I'm choosing now. I'm choosing to be calm and still. But then later on, or if I can do in the time, integrating who is this person that's anxious, who is this person that feels like this, and becoming it more and integrating it into my awareness. And I don't know if I answered that question, but that was my dialogue on it. Number 8 is, what practices help reconnect the mind and the body in a world that constantly pulls us into distraction? Simple practices are just reading, improving your intellect, and improving the refinement of how you see the mind and how you see the body and how you see yourself within the world. And the more you develop your intelligence and the more you develop your understanding of the mechanics of how you work, the more separation you get from that and the less pulled into distraction you become. You become stronger from reading things. You become stronger from refining your intellect. And I think a simple practice is to learn, is to be constantly growing in that way of developing an intellect and using that to help your spiritual growth and your psychological growth. Other practices, as I've said, are meditation, prayer, simple things like walking, just going for a walk and being able to just like listen to nature, be outside, not being locked in this box that we all sit in all day. That's just a very simple practice. Going to the gym, training martial arts, training football, whatever like sports you want to do, moving your body and making sure it feels alive and it works properly and it operates properly, that you're not all locked up and hunched over. You're in touch with the breath, you're moving the vehicle that puts you through the material world. That's incredibly important, and that's a simple practice. Another simple practice that is more abstract is just bringing yourself into the world as you are, meeting the responsibilities of life as you are, and actually taking seriously what's in front of you. If life presents you with people and circumstances to show you where you're not free, life is bringing things to you, and it's kind of asking you and it's requiring of you, like, how much can you take here? How much can you accept here? How much can you be here? And I think that's incredibly important. And I think just bringing yourself and learning to be yourself in life and show up to things is another practice that is deceptively simple but hard to implement and hard to do. And so there we are. I'm going to do one more, I think, guys, because this video is a lot longer than what I thought. So, do you believe people have a core self, or are we constantly being reshaped by experiences and beliefs? Whoa, big one, big question. Do I believe people have a core self, or are we constantly being shaped by experiences and beliefs? I think that there lies the self. There lies this unmoving, unchangeable force of energy. And it is the collective nature of who you are. But I believe it changes throughout life with experience. But I don't think it's shaped by... I don't know. Wow, what a question. Well, let's think. The moment you're born, like, there is consciousness there. There's something there that exists. Behind the identity, behind the idea of who you are, behind the label of your name, there exists something. There exists this being. Let's call it awareness. Let's call it consciousness. And then you formulate an identity above that. And then that becomes you. And that like awareness that you was born with, that consciousness, is the breeding ground. Again, it's the soil that creates the rest of it. And then you learn things and you experience things and you believe different things and you test that against reality. And so you're constantly changing in a way. I think this depends how we define self. Because I think your ego changes. I think your identity in a way of the humanness changes. You're never the same person as you were a year ago. You think different ways. You act different ways. But I think there's an essence of the sameness of who you are. And so I think this depends how we define self. we are definitely being changed in a way by experience. We learn, we unlearn, we adapt, we grow. We sometimes regress, we shrink. So we're constantly flowing. Nothing's static. Everything's always moving. But there does seem to be this level of conscious awareness of we are the same person throughout life. Like, I am still that orb of consciousness that is known as Alex Rogers in the world, but is my felt experience, is a felt sense of being me. And I've always been me throughout all my life, but me has been shaped differently and seen differently to the world and to my own experience of an identity. And so I think there is a core self, and we also, on top of that, get change in it and we change and be reshaped by experiences and beliefs. So I think we do both in a way. Number 10, how do habits shape identity on a subconscious level, and how can spiritual rituals help rewire them? Well, habits are huge, right? Habits are kind of just like, what would we do without a habit? Everything becomes a habit in a way, and it kind of makes things easier, and things become unconscious through repetition. Think of walking up the stairs. If I had to use all my conscious awareness to walk up the stairs with every, like, how I moved my foot and how much weight I shifted onto my left foot and then my right foot, that would be an absolute nightmare. But that is part of me. There's a schema, there's an imprint of how I walk up the stairs. And you think of that's a very simple idea, but then there's ways in social situations. It's like I now I don't have social anxiety. I do not think in social situations. But how much of that is just habit? How much have I learned schemas of how to operate in social situations? And then how much of that is subconscious on a level that's been imprinted into a habit? And so habits shape our identity in many ways. And the human brain, from an evolutionary point of view, is like, it wants to be a prediction machine. It wants to help us survive, and so it wants predictability. And so we act in predictable ways to get predictable results. So in a way, we are kind of constantly trying to live out habits because we find what is successful for us to survive and get success in the world, and we keep working on that and we keep living that out. And so that becomes subconscious in a way of how we are what we've always been. We act how we've always acted. We continue to act. And these can become negative in a way, because what serves you now and what serves you 10 years ago is different. And so say if you're still living out a habit of you had when you was 10 or you was 12, and you're still living that out now, that's not helpful. You develop mechanisms at different points in your life to help you adapt to the requirements of life then. Say if you're 12 and you're getting bullied and you learn this habit of shining away from social situations, at that point, you have learned that is the way to keep you safe. But if you're 22, 23, and you can't go and get yourself a job because you can't socialize, that habit that was built, that part of you that was built from when you're 12 and was a defense mechanism to protect you from the trauma and protect you from the hatred and the shame that was coming from that, is not helping you now. And it's a habit that you need to unlearn, and it's a habit that you need to go through. And spiritual rituals, like, let's say, using psychoactive substances or meditation retreats or just like prayer and meditation, they help become aware of them habits. They help you reflect on them habits and realize that what was serving you then is not serving you now. And you can show compassion for that part of you. You can show compassion for the habit, but now you can learn to rewire it and to incorporate something else. You can learn to embody something else. You don't have to be what you always have been. You can move and you can grow naturally forward into something else. And so I think that habits do shape our identity on a subconscious level, and we live a lot out of habitual nature, but it doesn't have to be the case. And I think as you get older, you learn to let go of the things that served you before, because what's required of you now is completely different to what was required of you before. Number 11, I'm just going to keep going now, guys. I'm not far off being there. Number 11, can healing be uncomfortable on purpose? Why does growth often feel like loss before clarity? Why growth feels like loss before clarity is because what actually is growth for us often contradicts what we think is growth. And what we think is growth is from the culture, is from our persona, is from our identity of what will impress others, what will make us feel good, what will get us social validation, God, I can't speak, social validation. And so therefore our idea of growth, our idea of success in the world comes from that hedonic, comes from that social status point of view, and we push into the world through that. And so when we actually healing is more of a stripping that back and touching with the raw, true nature of who we are, getting in touch with the defensive, them habits that we built throughout of our life, them parts of us that have been neglected, and getting in touch with them is a lot more about allowing them to unravel, allowing them to unfold, allowing them to live their truth in the moment now, and experiencing the pain, experiencing the discomfort, experiencing the depression and the apathy and the anxiety that part of you has sat with, locked away, that when you bring that up into the present moment, that has to manifest itself in your body for the energy to then dissipate and to move away. And so healing can feel uncomfortable because you bring things up from the past. You bring things up that have been locked away in your unconscious, that have been repressed, that have been locked within the body, and you bring them up and you let them come out, you let them unfold. But that can be horrible. It can be heart-wrenching, it can be depressive, it can be anxiety-riddled, it can be all of them things. And you've got to let that play out, and you've got to feel that and experience that, and then let it go and move on. But you have to go through that. And often it starts with letting go of the ideas of where you think you should be, because where you think you should be is actually a defense of accepting where you are and who you are, and where you eventually should be going. So who you think you are and where you think you should be, them ideas and them aspirations and the motivations, be very careful, because they're very tricky, they're very elusive in the way that they feel grand, they feel ambitious, they feel good, they make you feel good in the moment, but in reality it could be taken away from accepting who you are and where you are right now. And that's what I have to say about that. Number 12, what does it actually mean to be aligned, and how does misalignment show up emotionally or physically? I'm going to try and not talk about this intellectually. I'm going to try and talk about this experientially. And have you ever had that feeling of you're in the right place at the right time? That's what it is to feel aligned. And it could be in the way that the Taoists say, you're in flow. You're in the right place. Things feel less resistant. And I feel like the resistance that comes from the mind, the symptomatic emotional responses of anxiety, depression, not feeling good about yourself, maybe they are impulses, maybe they are warnings from your psyche for you to get back on track and for you to be aligned. And what it means to be aligned is for your ego to be in dialogue with the soul, with the self, and to be working harmoniously towards a balance. If you look at the yin and the yang, you've got the middle part, for you to be sat within the middle and for you to be on the middle path. That's what it means to be aligned, and that's what it means for you to be postured right within the world. And it can show up emotionally and physically in tiredness. It can show up with frustration, with anger, with depression, all of these different psychosomatic illnesses that come up. That could be a sign that you're not in the right place at the right time. And it's then for you to listen to the symptoms and to listen to what they're trying to speak to and where they're trying to get you to. Number 13, how much of our identity is inherited psychologically or energetically from family or ancestors? Right, this is really interesting. I'm going to speak about an experience I never spoke about before. So I had a experience with a certain psychoactive substance which was enlightening to this idea. And I had a feeling when I was in the peak of this experience that I wanted to be sick, and I was going down a tunnel within my mind, and like I was getting lost. My identity was completely dissipating. I was kept forgetting who I was. I was very scared. I was very afraid. The most afraid I've ever been in my life. It felt like I was dying in a sense of my identity was shattering. And then all of a sudden, I was with my friend, and I admitted to him, I'm like, mate, I'm extremely scared. Like I'm so scared to the point where like I don't know what I'm doing. And he was like, same, like this is so incredibly, this experience is so strong. But he was like, we've admitted it, it feels powerful. And that vulnerability to admit it allowed me to snap out of it for a minute. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh, I'm going to be sick. I feel like I'm going to be sick. And I just chunned it everywhere, like sick went everywhere. And the only way I can explain it is that sickness that came out of me, that experience of being physically sick, I felt like I shedded generational trauma. And after that experience, I got an insight into how I've picked up emotional baggage from my dad's experience. And I don't think maybe like genetically, we pick this up from like I come from my dad and my dad comes from his dad, and we're made from his energy. And if his energy is, and his experience is something of negativity and trauma, then it would make sense that energetically in our DNA, like biologically, that gets passed on, it gets encoded into our DNA. But I also think psychologically, as we grow up, our parents look at us through the lens of who they are. So they refine, and we get refined by our parents as little kids, as little children. We adapt ourselves to the judgments and praises of our parents, and they look at us through the lens of who they are. So if we do something they don't agree with, they look at us in a way that is to change us, or they look at us in a way that they disagree with that. So we learn to be closely refined with our parents. So our identity gets changed in that way. And if our parents' idea of who they are is shaped from all their experiences and all their trauma, all their good things, then surely by that, we are going to then be influenced by the traumatic experiences they've had. And that's how generationally it can get passed on. I think it gets encoded into our energy, into our DNA, and into our experience, but also it gets psychologically passed on through projection, through their shadow material that gets thrown out onto us, and through the way they look at us. Instead of them empathically mirroring us and looking at us for who we are, they look at us through the lens of who they are, and that gets stuck onto us, and we refine ourselves from that point. And so much of our identity is inherited from our parents and who they are. So a lot of it is generational. A lot of it comes from our ancestors. And also, if you think of it, like our identity is cultivated from certain experiences that are archetypal in the way that everyone experiences anger, everyone experiences anxiety, everyone experiences excitement, everyone experiences curiosity. These are things that have ancestrally been built into the human existence, that they're biological in a way that every human has a psychic and a biological imprint that allows for them experiences and them emotions of humanness to grow. And so in the collective unconscious, in a way, through like the whole span of human history, we've all refined human experience to experience them emotions, to experience them the repression and depression and anxiety. They've been designed through evolution. So, of course, our identity gets inherited from our ancestors, but also from our family and their experiences as well. 2 more questions, guys. We're nearly there. God, this has been a long podcast. Number 14. Is there a difference between motivation driven by fear versus purpose? And how does this affect long-term growth? It's like, what is purpose? Like this again, what does purpose mean? Is your idea of purpose that could most likely is fear driven? A lot of people that think they have a purpose of, my purpose is to be wealthy and to create this big business, and a lot of that comes from, wow, I feel like I am inadequate. I'm not adequate enough for love. I'm not being able to gather enough social validation when I was younger. So a lot of people's purpose that comes across as purpose is fear driven anyway. And the real difference, I think, is not knowing where you're going to go versus knowing where you're going to go. Jung had a quote which was, if the path beyond you is clear, it's probably not yours. And when you listen to the true speaking of the soul, or the true speaking of the self, it's actually spontaneous. It's actually just as much of interest to how it formalizes to you than it is to everyone else, and you're unaware of it yourself. And I think when people have this such concrete idea of a goal, or concrete idea of who they are and where they're going to go, I think that in a way is fear driven, because it's a fear of their true self and a fear of submitting to the organism and letting that emerge naturally into the world. And I think you need to have discipline on the daily bits, and you can have this vague idea of where you want to go and who you are, but I think to have this clearly identified purpose in as itself is fear driven, because it is the fear, it's running away from the fear of who you are. Last question, number 15. If someone feels disconnected from themselves, where should they start? The mind, the body, or the soul, and why? Start with the body. The body is the container for what allows you to move through the material world, and it's what allows you, when it has energy, to relate back to the mind. And maybe I'm a bit biased in this way because this is how I started, but I think you can learn a lot through exercise and getting in touch with your body. And I think it's the most clear sense of progress that you can get, the most clear sense of improvement, and the most clear and evident amount of confidence that you can find straight away to get you started on the path. And I think if you start with the body, in terms of if you go to the gym, if you start eating clean, if you walk more, if you move more, you will feel more alive. And through feeling more alive, you will actualize more of who you are. And so I think starting with the body is essential, because the flesh and the vehicle of what gets you through the world is... It's one of the most important things. It is so important. I think you must start with the body, in my opinion, because you are the body in a way. And if you look at bioenergetics by Alexander Lowen, his whole idea is suffering comes from the schizophrenic, the schizoid tendency. And the schizoid tendency is that humans live up in the mind, this pulled up version somewhere behind their eyes, located in the middle of their head somewhere, and it's like it's a thought, it's a speech, it's like a person up here, and they're not the flesh, they're not the thing that's connected to the floor. And I think you start to, and that thing that's up within the mind, that narrative, that talking, is all neurotic. It's all full of imagination and ideas and projections of where you should be, and insecurities and anxieties. And the body, when you get connected within the body, slows you down. It puts you at a slower pace. And it allows you then to come away from these narratives that's stopping you from getting in touch with your body, and then to start unraveling who you are. Who you are sits within the organism, and the organism wants to manifest itself in the world through the body. So I think if you start with the body, through movement, through meditation, through the breath, through strength training, through flexibility, through whatever it may be, whatever is the vehicle for your improving your body, if you start with that, that will teach you more about yourself and who you are, and it'll be the biggest gains, it'll be the biggest confidence booster straight away, but it will also allow you to come more down, start from bottom upwards, and it will allow you to come down into your body and away from this floatiness, abstract nature of living up in the mind somewhere. And so that is my video, people. Thank you very much for listening. That was 15 questions, I think 14 because I didn't answer one of them. But thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you all in the next video.